is the receptor solution sampling qualification. We touched based on many things. I think earlier we talked about, what are the specific consideration for the flow through diffusion cell versus vertical diffusion cell. We talked about the how critical is the tubing size for the flow through cell versus, vertical diffusion cell. Are there any consideration? And there's always a question about, what sampling technique you use, and especially like, based on the apparatus, does that apparatus provide you to go for the full replacement versus aliquot sampling, whether it's the automated or manual sampling? What are some of the thoughts on the use of aliquot versus full replacement, and what are the advantage, like what are the pros and cons for sampling technique in terms of the vertical diffusion cell?
Well, of course, the full replacement is laborious, and particularly if you have multiple Fran cells lined up to sample, you need 2, 3, 4 people sometimes to work with it. But of course, if the solubility is an issue or the LLOQ is an issue, full replacement is preferred. But if there is no other concerns and aliquot sampling can be done easily, it's depending on the molecule, depending on the study and your own capabilities. But in general, I think
to balance that out in favor of the manual sampling, I've never had a manual sampler break in the process, and so your automatic sampling might occur overnight, and you walk in the next day and your automatic sampler broke. You've lost all your data, all your samples. But my manual collectors, they hold up pretty good.
How do you validate them, Paul?
Well, it's full sample, full volume removal, full volume replacement. There's no calibration necessary.
I was talking about validating your manual samplers.
I think Paul's referring to that he doesn't break the people that do it. But moving aside from that for a moment, in theory, both should be acceptable. Theoretically, you just have to make a calculation adjustment if you're doing aliquot sampling, and there's some practical advantages to doing that. But in reality, we've seen numerous situations where aliquot sampling for IVPT studies, I mean, we recommend aliquot sampling with the same diffusion cells that are used for IVRT, right? So what's different with IVPT? I'm not sure that I know the full answer, but what I can tell you is that empirically, we've seen a lot of studies where people have done aliquot sampling, and rather than getting kind of a sensible flux profile, you see these sort of zigzag profiles that don't make a lot of sense, especially when you have regions of apparently negative flux, suggesting that at one point, at a certain rate of speed, the drug is going into the receptor solution, and then in the next time period, you've got an exodus of drug from the receptor solution back into the formulation, and then going back. This data doesn't make sense. Now, and I think the reason for that is because of the very, very small amounts permeating in that nanogram, picogram range, and the precision of the aliquot sampling. We've seen situations, and Dr. Murthy might be able to speak to this as well, when we've changed from aliquot sampling to full receptor removal, and the data has dramatically cleaned up and improved, and we get very sensible data. But I don't think it's a dichotomous, yes or no, that somehow there's a right answer and a wrong answer. I think the reality is that the more we can try to understand about why these effects happen, and if ultimately, this is why I really liked Yang's presentation in the early part of the morning. She successfully used aliquot sampling and got very nice flux curves. Now, she used 500 microliter aliquots. Depending upon the permeation, depending upon the variability, the controls in place, in her case, a 500 microliter aliquot was sufficient and precise enough that she didn't get irregular data. We've also seen other people use a 500 microliter aliquot and have the zigzaggy data. So I think the reality is you really have to understand the system and develop the method. And aliquot sampling can be done if it balances in with the variability and the precision, and how much is permeating from one time point to the next, and how precise you are, and the volume we're taking, and the error on that volume, those kinds of factors. I'd be interested in thoughts from the group.
Any other thoughts on aliquot versus full replacement before we move to the next topic?
I just want to comment on the the full volume replacement. There's another advantage that I think a lot of people were asking in the chat regarding maintaining the sink conditions. Of course, use of surfactants or solubilizing agents. That's one way, and the other way is, of course, by full volume replacement, you can certainly get the sink conditions. Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Dr. Rane, in our experience, when we started with the acyclovir IVPT studies, we tried this aliquot sampling versus full replacement. If you're just plotting cumulative permeation versus time, aliquot sampling looks great. There is incremental increase in the amount of direct permeating. But when you plot the flux profile, flux time profile, then you don't every time get a nice up and down curve with the aliquot sampling, particularly with acyclovir it happened. So I think after that we just stuck to full replacement and it never failed. So I recommend full replacement just out of my experience.
Thank you, Dr. Murthy, for sharing your insight. And probably this is a troubleshooting for the researcher who are getting a lot of negative flux. Probably if you want to go, I mean, it's not like you have to go with the aliquot or full replacement, but if you are getting a lot of negative flux in your profile, maybe you can consider going from aliquot sampling to the full replacement of the receptor solution. Now, once
or I would say, here, or consider increasing the size of your aliquot.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Rane. So once these preliminary parameters are identified, the next step is optimization of IVPT parameters.